Welcome, guys. So this is our very first podcast.
Podcast number one.
This podcast is called Crossroads of Thought. My name is Frank.
And my name is Ariel.
Honestly, the main point of this podcast is to enable intellectual conversation from potentially contrasting opinions respectfully. I think in a nutshell, that's what it's about.
Yep. And so we've had some conversations over the time that we've known each other, and this would just be a good time to go ahead and, flesh out some of those ideas that we've had. Both he and I go ahead and see things very similarly in a lot of ways, but we also go ahead and have contrasting opinions. And so I think part of this whole conversation is, like you were saying, to go ahead and have a conversation of potentially contrasting types of views. So for the format, we have an idea of where we're going to be going with this, but this is our first podcast. It's episode number one. Very
experimental, so please have some patience. And it might completely change, but this is our very first time doing it. So, like I said, this is just very experimental, so we'll iron it out over time.
Yep. And so for the time being, the podcast's format is going to be, we're going to have a topic for the episode, and then both he and I will go ahead and have 3 questions that we're looking to answer. I will have 5 minutes to go ahead and make my statement known, and then Frank will have 5 minutes to make his statement, and then we'll go ahead and have a conversation about those 2 statements for another 10-20 minutes. So we're looking at 20 to 30 minutes per question that we answer, and there's going to be 3 questions. So for example, today we're going to go ahead and start off with number 47. Who's number 47?
President Donald J. Trump.
President Donald J. Trump, president-elect up until today, January 20th, today being Inauguration Day. And so ahead of time, we went ahead and met up, and we went ahead and settled on a few questions that we were going to go ahead and talk about, but we nailed it down to 4 questions, to where 2 and 3 were kind of very similar. Mm-hmm. So the first question was, what ramifications will the tariffs that U.S. has on... What ramifications will the tariffs have on the U.S. government and its population? The second question was, how will Trump's presidency affect our international relations? And it's very similar to the third one, which is, what is the U.S. role in international affairs? So that was condensed into 1 question, 2 and 3. And then, so our last question will be, how will Trump's Department of Efficiency affect departments, agencies, and federal programs? So we're looking to go ahead and cover that today. This will be interesting. This will be exciting.
Yeah, and then also with that in mind, I'll go over through a quick discretionary notice. So the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guests, and do not reflect the views, policies, or positions of any organization, company, or employer we may be affiliated with. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional or legal advice. Listener discretion is advised. With that in mind, we'll go ahead and begin. Cool. All right, guys. So for the first question, so it says, so what impacts / ramifications will tariffs have on the U.S. government and its population? So first off, I wanted for myself to know, I know what a tariff is. However, I just wanted to have it defined. So a tariff is a tax imposed by a government on goods and services imported from other countries. So tariffs have been used in the past at various points in history. They've been aimed at various industries. So like one of the very first instances was the Tariff Act of 1789. It was passed by Congress. So it's basically done in order to protect American industries. So it's been used for the U.S. steel to even high-tech industries. So when it comes to the U.S. government, for example, like in 1861, as another example, it was passed to encourage and protect domestic manufacturing. But an offset to that, it increased consumer pricing, since it was more expensive to buy stuff that was made here versus buying something that was done foreign and it was basically imported from a foreign country. So the good, I guess, a positive aspect of that is it does protect local businesses from competition, in the hope that it fosters growth. In the past, industries like steel, textiles, and railroads, those have been some positives. As far as the effect it could potentially have, so one thing that I would add is protectionism. So back after World War One, we basically became more of an isolated country, and in doing so, they call it protectionism. So Congress pretty much decided to be more of an isolationist, and in doing so, hold on, bro.
Yeah, we can always cut it.
So I lost my train. Where was that? Okay, so when because of protectionism, we basically sought to make it kind of America first in a way, just kind of we basically are looking after ourselves. So that was one of the first instances. And then I guess at the same time when I guess the first trade war was President Trump. So overall, it was done to reduce the U.S. trade deficit and also counter China's trade practices. So what happened? So some U.S. manufacturing did come back. However, consumer prices did increase, and also it hurt farmers in the sense of soybeans. So now China actually buys soybeans from Brazil, so we kind of lost that. So overall, I think consumers will feel the pinch overall, especially when if for the tariff war, right? If it's specifically mostly at China, I mean they pretty much make most of our items, so I think that's where it's gonna really hurt us. But I think we need to actually kind of wean ourselves off of China, especially considering that they manufacture an enormous amount of product. And especially since they're a foreign nation, they are a foreign nation and potentially a foe, I think it'd be good to long term for sustainability to either make it ourselves or align ourselves with other nations that pretty much we work with them better, like our allies, I should say. So striking a balance, I think, is important when it comes to tariffs. Not just a universal tariff rate on absolutely everyone, but specifically aimed at certain industries, especially when the trade balance is really offset. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Okay. So I like that definition that you had tossed earlier. I think that sort of helps go ahead and define how we're going to be talking about this. I thought of it very similarly. What I was going to go ahead and sort of go into was the policies that Trump went ahead and has specifically stated. Now, as of this day, I don't think he's come out with an exact tariff, but we can go ahead and talk about what he did in the previous administration, or at least what he had mentioned in passing up until the election. He had talked about doing an additional 10% on China with an additional 25% to Mexico and Canada. And so for me, I'll go ahead and start off like, what is the goal with tariffs? And you kind of touched on this. Is the goal is for consumers here in the U.S. to spend money on American-made products. Why? So the demand goes up for American goods. So at the end of the day, the idea would be that more money is spent on American goods, and that will go ahead and increase manufacturing here. It'll go ahead and create job opportunities, or at least at the very least get money flowing in our economy. So this is Trump's first or second term. So we can't really know what he's going to do because you don't necessarily, just because a politician says something doesn't mean that that's going to be exactly what's going to happen. What we can do is we we can go ahead and look at what he did in his first term. And you had went ahead and touched on it. Trump went ahead and put tariffs on foreign steel. And so the whole purpose of it was for, at the end of the day, steel production to go ahead and go up in the United States. And we, since for the longest time, I guess our history, there's been a lot of steel production here in the United States. It's only been up till recently where we're no longer no longer the leader in exporting steel. And so steel production during this time in 2018, when he went ahead and put on these tariffs, steel production actually did go up in the United States. It went up quite a bit. But then production in companies who use those steels, like we're talking about car manufacturers here in the United States or people who use steel, those numbers actually went down. And you kind of touched on not necessarily that, but the other economy or other things that were getting exported got affected by it. So 1,000 more jobs were created between March of 2018 and March of 2019 for specifically in manufacturing of steel. But 75,000 jobs were lost in sectors where their main export or a main input was steel. And so we're talking about like Ford or other car manufacturers. They went ahead and, like, in that sector, they lost 75,000 jobs. There was another study done by the Federal Reserve Board, which went ahead and said that there was 0.6 fewer jobs in the manufacturing sector when tariffs were put. So without the tariffs, they said that there would have been not necessarily no effect, but because the tariffs were put in place, there was an actual drop of fewer jobs by 0.6%. So that roughly translates to the 75,000 jobs that we were talking about. So the whole idea was that there was small positive employment effects for those directly exporting or producing the steel, but the overall industry went ahead and got hurt. But one thing that I did think was interesting was Trump definitely started these tariffs, but Biden kept them. Like, Biden kept a lot of those tariffs that Trump went ahead and put in place. And even if there was like a net loss in terms of economic growth, I think there was a sentiment where Biden thought that this was, not Biden specifically, but that this was politically popular. So the estimated GDP is estimated to go down by 0.2% during that time. And I think one of the things that I was thinking of when I was doing my research about this is tariffs is a negotiating tool, but it needs to be used appropriately.
All right, and then that's the timer, guys, so this guy doesn't go more.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so this is the point in which we're going to have a discussion after I've said my piece, Ariel said his piece. So I guess based on the stuff that you said, as far as continuing some of the policies in play, like, for example, the tariffs, yeah, I think from what I've read is I think he kept most of them. I think he did get rid of some.
Yeah.
But then added the semiconductor. I think the tariff on semiconductors, which I think that's a good one, especially when that's kind of that's a very important piece that for the future is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Hence the whole Taiwan thing. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't really touch on because it wasn't exactly related to the tariffs, but so there was a stick and carrot analogy where the stick is you go ahead, the tariff is going to act as like a punishment for companies who use foreign steel in their production, right? We want them to go ahead and use American steel, create American jobs. But another incentive or another way of doing it was the carrot, the one that Biden went ahead and went through with the CHIPS Act. He went ahead and tossed money. And the idea of it is for it to go ahead and create a stronger presence in semiconductors, like you were talking about, because the United States really wants to get into that sector. So that's one way to go about it. But we're talking about tariffs here. So do you think, based off of the research that you were looking at, what do you like? Do you think it's going to be successful in the sense that it's going to create a stronger economy for the United States?
Well, I think we're gonna have there's gonna be issues in the sense of like you're passing on the rise, a rise in prices to consumers because they're gonna have to. I mean, I think ultimately what I see as the main objective is, and I'm talking solely on China. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about like Canada or Mexico or other countries. The reason why it's China because they're literally our largest trade partner. Like the trade deficit is so huge between us and them. And I think the biggest thing is the aim is to highlight how much of a deficit it is, and I see it more as hey, we need to really start working on different aspects, whether it be the car manufacturing, like at least getting it closer to back here in the U.S., or at least closer in the sense of like the whole geopolitical world, because it seems to be going in that direction. So I kind of see it in that way. It's more of like, hey, we should start to bring some of those key areas, like whether it be like medicine or manufacturing, back, especially when it seems to be becoming more of a heated environment when it's the United States and China.
So part of the you were talking about the trade deficit. Part of the idea with tariffs is to sort of insulate our market, market with like nationally, and so this kind of protects them from competing fairly. And now I think China has its own practices that they don't compete necessarily on the same level as American manufacturing, and that's why there's that deficit. But I do think that there might just be some insulation that steel manufacturers aren't having, like they're not competing, and so it might just be also a question of we need to go ahead and up our game a little bit. Yeah, for sure. And then also,
I think on top of that also is going to be, overall, like especially on the manufacturing side, like really try to bring that back, and overall, like our supply chain at the same time, making sure it's self-sustainable overall. Because if we have to keep relying not just solely on China, but in other countries, regardless, at the end of the day, like even if we're able to source some of the products somewhere else, and we manufacture here, you kind of still have the problem. You're still getting that material from there to begin with.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily that it's bad that we grab these products. I think part of the concern is we want citizens to be employed, and it's not necessarily like trade. Like I think trading is fine with other countries, but in terms of like semiconductors and steel, there is a base level that we want in case things go sour. Like specifically in the example of China and semiconductors, we want to have our own semiconductors in case there's any issues that we run into China or any of its allies. So we want to go ahead and be producing ours. I just, in my mind, I understand that tariffs can be helpful in negotiations, but I think that the effects from it outweigh I think that it's a net loss towards our economy and creating new jobs. I don't think it's going to have the results that Trump is hoping for. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I think also it's important that for tariffs, like not to be done so broadly. Like it has to be very specific, like with its intention, like with its strategy. You don't want to just say like, 20% on everything. Like that's I don't think that's really effective. Specifically targeting certain areas, I think that's the more of an approach versus just a broad stroke. Especially if we're gonna use certain things as a bargaining chip, we have to be very decisive in the way how we're gonna implement some tariffs, and at the same time think about like, okay, what do they want or what are they gonna do as
did you see what China tariffed when we went ahead and tariffed their steel?
No.
So like you said, it affected farmers, right? But they also went ahead and tariffed, I'm not even sure if I'm using that right, but they went ahead and put tariffs on jeans, whiskey, and what was the other one? But they went ahead and put tariffs on those things that we're exporting. And Harley Davidson.
I think I should see that. Yeah, which is kind of like, I guess that's the typical Western
export
apparel, not apparel, but just a material or goods.
That's what people like to buy.
What's more westernized than wearing some jeans, drinking on a nice whiskey. Harley, and then sipping on some old whiskey. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see ultimately what ends up happening. I'll stay on my side optimistic over things. I just hope that.
For you, it's a thing of like a trade deficit. Like you want us to go ahead and up our, like we need to be producing more. We need to be selling more to the rest of the world.
Well, but I think more along the sense of if we're gonna go this tariff side, we just got to be very careful on what the strategy behind it. Not just like I said, just doing we're doing 20% on absolutely everything. Like I think history also has shown it too, like after World War One. But I'll go along with go more through that in the next question. That'll lead to it, I should say.
I'm curious to see if he goes ahead and does anything similar to what Biden did and went ahead and increased funding.
Towards chip manufacturing and so forth.
Because he didn't do that. Like he talks about tariffs, and I read another statistic where in places where there's manufacturing jobs for steel, they voted more in favor for Trump. They voted more for Republican candidates, I should say, not specific to Trump, but Republican candidates, because of tariffs was a popular talking point. So the CHIPS Act, while I think the idea is there, I don't think it's not producing the results. But I think that it has the potential to go ahead and grow our economy.
Yeah, and I feel like with that in mind, I think it's also important that we need to figure out the hows, the whys, figure out how exactly we're gonna do this. Really think about it, and not just being we need to bring manufacturing back. Okay, how does that look like? We need to be very careful with that and really think it through.
Yeah.
So 3, 2, 1. Sorry, we got a timer and it's about to ring. Boom.
There it is.
Okay, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and move over to the next question. So for the second part, technically it's 2 questions lumped into one. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So the question is, how will Trump's presidency affect international relations? So for me, I'd like to go the history route. So considering this administration, it's more of an American first doctrine. I know this kind of rubs countries kind of the wrong way. Part of it may be because of his ego. Part of it can be seen as aggressive, brash, and also kind of break away from kind of traditional ways. So as far as history is concerned, how I'm trying to tie that in together. So back in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. So right after World War One, you basically were wanting to be more of an isolationist, have more isolationist policies. So we basically passed this, but this then triggered a global trade war. So this worsened the Great Depression. So tariffs were set for over 20,000 importing goods with an average of 40%. And because of that, other countries retaliated back, like Canada, Great Britain. They retaliated with even higher tariffs on U.S. exports. So as a result, world trade actually declined by over 60% from 1929 to 1934. So because we were kind of isolationist, we had a strong desire to avoid foreign entanglements, and we wanted to prioritize domestic concerns over global commitments. And actually, even during that time, we even refused to join the League of Nations, which is the predecessor to the UN. So as all this is going on, the escalating tariff war, is impacting the global market, very negative. So on the world stage, it kind of made the U.S. seem, very selfish, kind of self-interested in the international community. So particularly in efforts to stabilize the world economy. So with our isolationist kind of mindset, it contributed to global instability, which this kind of helped fuel the rise of totalitarian regimes like in Germany, Italy, and Japan, thus leading to World War II. Our reluctance to be on the world stage and intervene left a power vacuum. Not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's kind of a fear that I have if we try to be more of an isolationist country. So what about the U.S.'s war? I'm sorry, the U.S.'s international affairs, like isolation versus global presence. So the exact question, let me rephrase that, is what is the U.S.'s role in international affairs? And then we added, more of an isolationist versus global presence. So for me, I believe the U.S. should still remain on having a global presence. Like I said, I like to go back on history. When we tended, right after World War I, we tended to be more of an isolationist nation or isolationist policies. I feel like the U.S. is a beacon of democracy. And with that, we're a leader in innovation, culture, and political discussion on the world stage. I think it's important to encourage democracy. I feel like it's a prevailing system around the world. The ability to openly exchange information, leading to innovation, problem solving, and just overall progress, I think is important. And kind of showing that to the rest of the world, I think is certainly the model based on my opinion. Furthermore, like the ability that we have independent journalism to hold power, hold them accountable, investigative reporters, they can expose corruption, abuse of power, societal injustices without fear of government retribution. That's often a feature often absent in countries such as having a state-controlled media. So in the world stage, if we can support, if the U.S. is more on that global stage, I think overall it's important. I feel democracy is currently the most important system, and I feel we need to kind of still put gas, I guess, pedal to the metal. That's even the right good thing to say. And in my head, I kind of think of it, some of the other prevailing systems is more of an authoritarian, totalitarian systems. I feel those are worse. Maybe that's not the right way to be thinking of it. It's one or the other. But I feel democracy is kind of the way to go, and I feel the U.S. should still have that role in international affairs.
Okay. So from my perspective, from what I've heard of from Donald Trump is, and part of the MAGA culture is very much isolationist. They have, I'll go ahead and say that he'd prefer to go ahead and stay out of international conflicts, and I get that. I think there's been a lot of backlash, especially with what we've done in the Middle East up until this point in time. But like you were saying earlier, part of the problem in terms of being isolationist is it kind of leads a power vacuum on the global stage, and I think we both agree that that we don't want to be over involved, and we don't want to be getting into these conflicts with every single country. But we do need to have some level of presence to go ahead and protect our allies, especially those who are democratic, if need be. But my thought with Trump is that he's very much talked about making America first, and that doesn't necessarily mean being isolationist, but he's very much not interested in international conflicts whatsoever. I am curious to see what happens with Ukraine, because I think that there was some questions as to what's going to happen there. So we'll see where that goes. What is our role in international affairs? One of the things that I think is going to get brought up, or that we've referenced to at least once already, was China. Back post World War II, there have been investments that we've made into other countries' economies to sort of provide production for renewable energy and training them to go ahead and be self-sufficient in their own countries, and sort of have a global assistance that we have with allies who are democracies and not. I think with America First mentality, there's been the shift of focusing solely on investments in our country, and I get that. But one thing that is concerning to me is China. Back in 2013, they went ahead. 2001 or 2013, they went ahead and announced that they were going to be building. I forget what the name of it is, but the new Silk Road, and so it's supposed to be connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe to China, and so it's supposed to be this railroad system that's supposed to go ahead and contribute to sort of connection and economy and culture, and it's supposed to tie these countries together that we haven't seen, and I think that that's great for them specifically. China will definitely have a bigger presence on the global stage. It's set to finish in 2049. I'm looking for the United States to go ahead and make some level of investment with our allies, and I think we have. But with this America First mentality, I'm concerned as to how that's going to go ahead and keep us from only focusing on investments here in the United States.
All right, guys. So we just finished giving our both pieces to questions. So yeah, I guess the whole America First thing. Yeah, it is somewhat concerning in the sense of I don't want, I guess in my point of view, not to abandon kind of our allies or leave them hang to dry. I can understand the whole of like there's more of an emphasis or more of a highlight on, okay, how much foreign aid are we giving all these countries, X amount of dollars, what's happening to the problems happening domestically. And I get that. Overall, though, I guess I think it's still important to support our allies, especially in history, which we've supported them for so long. I don't know. What do you think? Do you feel
I think it's important to protect interests to a certain extent. Now there's going to be some give and take. I think right now we're sort of seeing, I think it's a bit unpopular at the moment to be protecting. We went ahead and have seen sort of a transition from full-on support for Ukraine to now a should we even be continuing to do this? And I think I can understand that we've been spending a lot of money on them, and I think that's where it comes from. But at the same time, we don't like totalitarian regimes, and this is a show of force from Putin, trying to grab these oil resources. And I guess that kind of ties into some of the things that Trump has claimed about Greenland and the Panama Canal, where it's concerning for other countries too, where he's trying to go ahead and take some piece of land, and I'm not saying that he can't be doing that, but at the same time, it's a thing of we want to, like, if Greenland or Panama Canals are interested, like, is there a more modern way of doing this? Otherwise, we have a regime we have a government in place like Putin that is just doing it for their international, for their own benefit. So it's a bit of what is it called? Brashness, like you were saying, where the United States can go ahead and do that type of thing, but I'm not looking to go ahead and get into war specifically for Greenland or the Panama Canal. Like, if we want to buy them and they want to join, great. But it's more of a thing of not trying to, like, we're trying to stop these countries from invading democratic nations, and then we go ahead and do this. It internationally, we've already been getting backlash from it. So,
do you feel like some of that backlash, it's even more so just because it's Trump, meaning, it's a celebrity, he's always been on a celebrity, it doesn't come from the traditional background of, someone going to an Ivy League school or political science background? Do you feel like that?
I think it's not
comes into play.
From maybe to some people, I think for me it's more about the promises he makes, the statements he makes. It's not really his background per se. To me, it's really what his ideas are, and his ideas are very aggressive. But there's it looks bad on the national stage, but I'm sure there are people out there that go ahead and don't like it because it's coming from a celebrity or stuff like that. It's just a bad look, and but I'm sure, like, people, like, they're gonna play that up. Like, that's gonna be something that they talk about. It's like, oh, he's just a celebrity, he's like, you're fired type thing. They're gonna play on that. Like, that's just for sure. I as far as the whole, like, Panama Canal and the whole talks of potentially buying, is it Greenland or Iceland? I always mess that up. Greenland.
Because sometimes they're the inverse of, like, oh, Greenland, but it's actually ice. Like, it's like...
It's reversed.
Yeah, it's like, whoa. Yeah. Maybe that's how I always remember. I just didn't know which country it was. So, I guess the thing that I kind of do like is the whole, like, negotiation aspect of, oh, how much? I guess, for me, I kind of, at least... I kind of do like that aspect. Just because it ain't, at least maybe I'm looking at it very, I don't know, the optics are different for me. I think it encourages more of the negotiation aspect, not only on the world stage, but it kind of opens up that dialogue within other departments, within other organizations within the U.S. And kind of just speaking from my own experience, a lot of times we just buy something, and it might not be the most effective decision, and we might do it mostly for convenience, and the convenience comes with a cost. And for me, I know there is a balance to it, but I feel nowadays we're always seeking convenience, and that does come with a cost. I feel, and at least from my perspective, we need to steer more on the effective side. Steer more towards trying to come up with more of an effective solution. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer, but ultimately it's going to be more effective, and hopefully that'll lead into further solutions by kind of thinking things and making things more effective overall.
So what's the benefit of purchasing Greenland that you see?
Well, granted, I haven't done that much research. I know that it's mostly based upon it's just a strategic point because it gets us closer to Russia.
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
or that's what you've seen?
Yeah, I know I think we have a couple of bases already out there that are really small. From what I've seen, it's just a strategic geographical area in which it just gives us more eyeballs, but it's more on the military, like strategic side. I think. Do you think
that's the purpose, or do you think it's more of a thing of also going back to this idea of manifest destiny, where we're country, we can expand, we can go ahead and we've kind of stopped doing that, and I think part of what Trump was talking in his inauguration today is today is the start of the next golden age or golden era of the United States, and what better way than to go ahead and get Greenland and the Panama Canals, right?
Yeah. Well,
I think it's just very it sounds nice to people who want to go back to the days of the United States where we were just getting everything.
Yeah, and I guess in my head,
do you think would go ahead?
I don't think we're going to, at least for Greenland is concerned, I don't think that it's going to come down to a military conflict.
That's what I was going to ask.
In my opinion, I don't think it's going to happen. It would be it would be very unpopular. I don't really see the need. I don't know how. I think it's more of a talking point. I think there is some there is the goal of. I think the main part of it is just establishing military bases permanently. I think that's mostly the goal. And if they say no, I don't think we're gonna invade them. I think that would be terrible overall.
I can get on board on buying Greenland. I think my concern is keeping away from any military invasion. My concern though is that I guess it's a negotiation tactic of a sense of we'll go ahead and invade militarily, but then Greenland doesn't, and Greenland's oh no, you're not going to go ahead and invade, you're not going to get that support from your the people who voted you in, and Trump would be yeah, I can go ahead and I got my supporters, there's not going to be a problem here. So maybe it's just a negotiation tactic, but my concern would be that he does invade and people aren't upset about it. I think that anything in terms of invasion into with the purpose of expanding, for the sole purpose of expanding, isn't great.
Yeah, I mean that brings back to the whole the age of is it imperialism, or is that when basically
I don't know. I don't know if it's the age of imperialism. I know that we were just
it's basically the new world when basically you expand and then there's no territory and you're claiming it, and then well, honestly, we're just talking about history, because in history that's always been the thing. You have the biggest player, and then all of a sudden, a certain amount of years goes by, and then boom, you have in this other civilization where this guy who has ambitions of power, and it's just repeated over time. Yeah. So, I guess.
But are we still
have we gone past that?
Yeah, have we gotten past that to a certain extent?
I think that's.
And that's why
I think it's impossible considering.
But it's impossible. But at the same time, we can strive for it, and I think that the next best thing would be to go ahead and do purchasing of countries.
Yeah, I think that's the more diplomatic, or we can pull a Russia card and just invade because we want to stop.
We see them as a national security concern.
Yeah, and we want to stop neo-Nazis. Yeah. So, but anyway, with that, man, do you have anything else to add?
No, not for that topic.
Cool. All right, guys, we're going to move on to the next question here.
Okay, so moving on to our final question here. How will Trump's Department of Efficiency, in quotation marks, affect department, agencies, and programs? Thoughts for or against it? So, I guess going into the purpose of the Department of Efficiency, it was to go ahead and reduce regulatory recessions, reduce administration, and increase cost savings, or so to go ahead and cut down on our costs on a federal level. And so this was talked about quite a bit leading up to this last election cycle, and with good reason. I get the incentive or the reason why people think it's like a good idea, and I get it to a certain extent. So last year, $6.75 trillion in 2024 was spent by the federal government, of which we did not have 1.83 trillion of that. So the federal government went ahead and spent 6.75, but they went ahead and owed, or we didn't have the money for 1.83 trillion of it. So we were over budget by almost a 2 trillion amount. And so one thing that Elon Musk was talking about in terms of numbers was cutting down on departments and programs that can go ahead and save us those $2 trillion. So the initial goal, Elon Musk and Vivax, was to go ahead and cut it down by $2 trillion. And so I'll just go and list some of the different departments and agencies and programs that were looking, or had been mentioned by them. So starting off, we had the Department of Defense. That was one at the top of the list. Next, Department of Education. After that, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, so PBS and NPR. Planned Parenthood, and then international organizations. I'm not sure exactly what that fell under. I'm not too sure there. The IRS was another one looking to go ahead and cut. The FTC, the DOJ, and the SEC. So that's the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and the Security Exchange Commission, I want to say. And then towards the very end, we've got NASA, and then we've got the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So all of these considered, the ones that they've talked about getting rid of completely is the Department of Education. All the others they've talked about making cuts to. Since then, Elon Musk's initial statement of $2 trillion has been walked back to $1 trillion promise. So the whole idea was to go ahead and drop our $1.83 trillion over budget. And what I did see was we owe $882 billion in interest. So already like half of this over budget is coming from just interest on the loans that we're having to pay back to other countries. I understand the concern, but I think in terms of administration, I think that's where a lot of the idea comes from in doing these cuts. I think that part of my concern with some of these are just what are we cutting away at? For example, Department of Education, of the $1.75 trillion, its entire budget of 2024 represented 4% of the entire thing. So we're talking about $283 billion. Now, doing some research into it, it doesn't seem like the idea is for them to completely delete it, but that's not what Trump had been saying. And if we were to go ahead and completely delete it, it is responsible for providing financial support to it's important for Pell Grants, which provides money towards students who are low income, and the Department of Education also goes ahead and administers subsidized loans to students as well. So I can understand wanting to cut, but with the 4% that it currently takes up of the budget, I don't think that's where we should be making cuts per se.
Alrighty. Okay, so for the question, to reiterate it, so how will the Department of Efficiency affect agencies, departments, programs, and also what are your overall thoughts? You know, if you have an opinion for or against it. So for me, I will tie in history. I kind of use that a lot overall. So there has been several examples of, I guess, Department of Efficiency. So one example is the Bureau of Efficiency. So that was created right after World War I. So it was basically made so that federal government operations are more efficient, so by reducing waste and improving performance. So they did succeed in making several federal agencies more efficient during its early years. It reduced costs and streamlined administrative processes. It did have some negatives. So like there was a lot of opposition, a lack of government funding, and ultimately it was abolished due to a shift for quicker economic recovery efforts due to the Great Depression. So it was pretty much nixed in order to go for a different solution. Another example is the efficiency movement in the early 20th century. So this promoted the application of scientific management principles. It's also known as Taylorism. So it's pretty much it's for both public administration and private industry. So it's in order to increase scientific management principles. So this movement is popularized by figures like Frederick Taylor and then Henry Gantt, and it emphasized the use of data, time studies, and standardized methods to improve productivity. So what were positives over it? So basically governments and businesses sought to optimize labor and resources by applying efficiency principles with the goal of reducing waste and increasing output. So what ended up happening? So it did lead to improvements in certain sectors, such as manufacturing, where efficiency gains were realized through better organization of work and the use of technology. So overall, this whole Department of Efficiency, I don't think it's a radical idea, especially when we look at history. There are other nations who have their examples of efficiency that is to be created. So I don't think it's like a radical idea. I think the biggest thing is how they go about implementing this. What exactly is going to be cut? What's going to be reduced? That's an important question that we need to ask ourselves or our lawmakers. They ultimately kind of reflect on. So kind of looking into this, I also looked into potential agencies right now that are kind of doing the same thing. So currently there's over 450 federal agencies. So for example, the Small Business Administration, Department of Commerce, some other entities, they've run very similar programs. So to assist small businesses, this could lead to potential overlaps. So maybe potentially consolidating to reduce the redundancy. This would help overall be efficient. And then some of the low impact or high cost programs, those could be further studied, especially with some that have very low participation rates, or just overall, limit to the public impact. Those might be some good programs to kind of isolate and then further question as far as their long-term sustainability and whether or not it makes sense to continue. And I guess another aspect to look into is programs with low demand for which they can be justified by broader social or cultural benefits. They could be potentially reviewed for potential reduction or elimination, especially if they're already getting the funding for them is already not there. So overall, I think it's important to be aware of our budget, to be aware of where our money is going to, especially since it seems like Our deficit's getting higher. At the same time, though, to keep in consideration, we've had this deficit for a while, so it's nothing new. Overall, though, it is important to keep that in mind. I think, in my opinion, efficiency is good, but ultimately, we really need to figure out how exactly we're gonna go about on being efficient. That's a very important question. Hopefully, we can narrow it down.
Okay. So just to go ahead and talk a little bit about the Department of Efficiency. I think the idea of efficiency is good. I think that making sure we go ahead and cut where we have unnecessary expenses is obviously good. Anytime we go ahead and do that, I think, and it results in a more efficient government, that's a win, right? That's a win for all of us. I think my concern is specifically making cuts to necessary programs. And my concern, at least initially, is sort of what they've talked about in terms of the Department of Education being cut, just completely deleting it. Since then, I've read that it's kind of it would be difficult to go ahead and delete the Department of Education, since you'd need like a simple majority in the House, and then you'd also need to go ahead and have a 60 vote majority in the Senate. So it'd be very difficult to delete it. Adding to that, though, this part of the thing that you were talking about, where this isn't a radical idea of we've done this in the past in terms of efficiency. I agree. Like you said, it was the Bureau of Efficiency in the 1920s, mm-hmm. right? My concern is that this won't actually be an official department. This will be more of an advisory role from Elon Musk. And I saw in a quick headline today that Trump is already getting sued for like lack of transparency of the government. I think that, to me, it's concerning that this is being done privately. If it results in a win, that's great. But I think what's radical is that this is more than likely not going to be an official department, because of the same reason why it would be difficult to delete the Department of Education, because you need a simple majority in the House of Representatives and a 60 vote majority to avoid the filibuster in the Senate. So this is going to be this Department of Efficiency is really going to be delegated to a handful of legislators in the House and maybe in the Senate. In my research, Marjorie Taylor Greene was one that got brought up. One of the things that I did see in terms of, well, what do you think of 800? I'll go back to what I was going to say. I'll go ahead and ask you, like, what do you think of the $882 billion in interest?
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy.
That's like almost half of our of the deficit that we have. 882 is just interest on loans that we've taken out.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
The whole thing is this could all get fixed within 5 years. We just tax more people, right? Like, the whole reason why we have a deficit is because we're trying to cut. We are trying to cut how much money the government spends, and so we go ahead and make tax cuts. But if we wanted to, up until this point, my understanding is we have like a $36 trillion deficit, which is a huge problem. But if we were to tax everyone at 50%, everyone including from the poorest to the richest, it would be solved in a matter of years. But not necessarily trying to do that, right? But to me, that was a thing of it can be done, but we're not trying to go ahead and do that. One thing that I did think was interesting was before Biden and Harris left, he went ahead and made a recommendation for the 2025 budget that households making more than $100 million pay 25% annual income, including on unrealized gains. And the reason why that's interesting to me is that unrealized gains is basically taxing wealth that are in stocks.
Okay.
And we're talking about billionaires who go ahead and we're talking only about people who are making 100 million, and a lot of their wealth are in stocks. So what I have with my house right now, I pay property taxes on it, right? But the value of it is just it's not real until I go ahead and sell. But I'm still paying taxes on the value of this house, even though I haven't sold it. With that, they estimated that if they were to go ahead and introduce this would increase revenue by $50 billion every year. So that would be $500 billion over the course of 10 years. I think that stuff like cost cutting is good. I think that Elon Musk shouldn't be. I think this should be an official department, but I doubt that that's going to happen just with the way that it's set up. But I am concerned as to what will be cut.
Yeah, and I mean, and also in order for this to be successful, this has to be a long-term project that basically that goes farther than just one term. That's kind of a weakness from the kind of some of the system that we have, is it could easily be killed and then in the next administration where it might be. So in order for it to work, from my opinion, this needs to continue on the long-term scale. Even if we do come up with this department, this needs to continue on in order for us to. I don't think we're going to be able to cut down on a large part of the deficit in just a couple of years.
No.
So this has to kind of transcend over time. And then from the other example for the Department of Efficiency, that almost went like 20 years before it got nixed because of the Great Depression. Like we basically killed that in order to use some of that money for something else.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, this, even if it's not in the department or just the idea itself, it needs to continue because otherwise we're not going to see the gains, And overall, I think it's important to cut down on overall debt, on how much we're spending on certain programs. Not to throw too much my own personal experience, but I guess I am. I have seen a lot of wasteful spending. It's pretty nuts, not gonna lie, and it's hard. It's hard and easy, if that makes sense, to be able to then multiply that across 50 states.
Yeah.
In that scale. So I feel
you're saying that you see it in the local level, and because of that, like, you can imagine that it's everywhere.
Yeah,
like that type of spending, spending practices.
Or that mentality. As far as that's why I guess I tie that back into the whole effective decision making rather than convenience, because I think that's what happens. Oh, it's more convenient just to keep buying the same stuff from this one company because they're getting it done, right? But maybe if we take some extra time, we can find out company B and C, they're a lot cheaper, but because there's additional hoops to jump through by looking at these other two companies, we might be, it's too much work, let's do the convenient route, let's still keep doing company A, although they are way more expensive. I feel like just giving it a second thought, as far as especially on the purchasing side, I think that would definitely be of a great benefit, and negotiation as well. I think that's important to continue to foster.
Yeah. So I'm trying to see if I wrote it down here. So the Department of Defense. So I'll go ahead and say, like, I think that an organized, like, pass through Congress Department of Efficiency makes sense. I don't think that Elon Musk should be the one who's heading this. I think that this needs to be government officials, that these are congressmen and women who are making these decisions, not a private organization, not a private entity, not Elon Musk. I think that it's just a lot. He's a citizen. He's not an elected official. He shouldn't be spearheading this campaign.
And then quick on that, though, I will say, though, it's maybe having him as a third party, as a, like, for example, when government agencies are audited, right? Sometimes they might use another federal agency in order to audit them, right? But sometimes it's useful to use a third party that's not affiliated within the government, because sometimes they're going to be way more they're going to be a bit more stricter, or they're able to find more things, versus sometimes if it's within the same government agency, it's possible they can overlook certain things because of who they know. And I guess you can say something about third party, but I think it's important to bring a third party. Maybe potentially he can come with that role. And I guess the way how I think about it too is, okay, so let's talk about Elon Musk. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. So who's Elon, right? So he basically is founded SpaceX, Tesla, working on Neuralink, Starlink now for internet. So I think it is important to recognize he did build those companies. If we look at Tesla, I mean, there were times in which he was real close to going bankrupt and pretty much ending. But look at it now; it's one of the largest electric vehicle manufacturers. He's increasing the supply chain. Overall, he's kind of turned it around. I think that's important to recognize, as far as him being able to, really cut costs in order to remain operationally open. Same thing with the other entities that's involved. SpaceX too. I mean, now they're landing rockets, right? That wasn't really a big thing back in the day. We used to rely heavily on the Russians. We used to buy their rockets, and they're not reusable. That was a big dependency that we had. He was able to figure out to at least reuse some aspect for rocket technology. That's super important, and that's cut costs for all of us overall, especially for the U.S. government, and less dependency on a foreign nation. So if we look back, regardless of how you might feel for him, I think it's good to recognize the value he brings in that sense.
Making a system more efficient.
Yes, because I mean, it's like, if you look, a big part of it is evidence-based, right? Let's look at evidence, right? So let's look at, for his case, let's look at his companies, right? Well, like, okay, if you look at his companies, they've all been startups, right? But they still are existing. They're one of the most popular and most worth, I guess, high worth companies nowadays.
Yeah.
Even with Starlink, man, like Starlink, that's going to be the next big thing. They're gonna be a huge player in the game, considering there's not that many others that are doing satellites. Anyway, I'm going off a tangent, maybe rambling a little bit, but Ariel?
I think that him having an advisory role is good for this type of legislation. I think it should be more under a department. But my concern with this is that without him being in that advisory role, I think that it's going to be very much what he suggests goes, and it's on our congressmen and women to go ahead and realize that he might be doing some cost cutting that is not necessary. And I think that's coming from my perspective of, if left unchecked, he's going to go ahead and cut things that are necessary.
That are necessary?
Yeah.
Okay. That's
my concern. So, but yeah, I think that's it for this episode.
Okay, guys. So with that, we will conclude this episode. If you guys have any feedback, feel free to leave some comments. You can find us on YouTube at Crossroads of _thought.
All one word.
All one word. There is another channel. It's mostly, I think it's mostly quotes based. So just to kind of distinguish ours from theirs.
Ours is with one video at the moment, so that'll be how you can tell.
Yeah, and ours is gonna look way better overall.
Yeah.
You can also find us on Spotify, and it's Crossroads of Thought. We will also be uploading newer episodes on there. And with that in mind, we'll go ahead and sign out.
This is Ariel.
And I'm Frank.
And we're signing off. See you next time.